Hello and welcome to another episode of KARE 11 on the Record. I'm political reporter Danny Spiewak. One of the most fascinating and consequential political states in the nation is right in our backyard. That's the state of Wisconsin. And this past week, there were more major political developments. There was an election for a state Supreme Court seat, and liberal Chris Taylor won that seat handily over her conservative opponent. That gives the liberals an expanded majority on the Supreme Court. Recently, there were also national headlines in Wisconsin for the ousting of the University of Wisconsin system president. And later this year, there's an open seat for governor and many seats up for grabs in the state legislature. To make sense of all this, we went to our eyes and ears on the ground in Wisconsin. That's Neil Kraus, a UW River Falls political science professor. Well, Neil, thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming to KARE 11. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
We've got a lot to talk about in Wisconsin, obviously, this week. Let's start with the state Supreme Court race.
Yeah.
Not quite the same level as we saw the last few cycles with the amount of money that was spent, but the liberal candidate winning pretty big in this race. Tell us just the significance of that.
I think it's a pretty big deal. I think that most of us expected that she would win, probably not by 20 points. I mean, if I had predicted what the outcome would be, I would have probably predicted, 8 or 10 points maybe on a really good night. And so she won big, and I think that surprised a lot of folks. Turnout was not as high as last spring when control of the court was at stake. So, but that also was to be expected. I mean, last year, of course, Elon Musk got involved in the spring elections, and it received national attention for really many weeks prior to the election. This time around, not quite as much, even though there was a state Supreme Court race on the ballot. This year also, there was not the state superintendent of public instruction, Jill Underly. She was up for election last year, so that kind of drew attention to the race as well statewide. And then there were a lot of school board races and school referendum, that went to the people on the ballot. Going back to the Supreme Court race, I mean, Taylor went huge, really, and I think that's got to really boost the Democrats.
Given that we're looking at midterms later in the year, everybody wants to look at Wisconsin as a bellwether. Do you think it is an indication of how voters are feeling in a swing state, or is that reading too much into it?
I think definitely the kind of the wind is blowing in the Democrats' direction, right? I wouldn't take the 20-point differential. Let me back up. I would take it with a grain of salt. I do think, nationally, we've seen this around the country, actually, in the last several months. Local races, state races in different parts of the country. Democrats have done very well. They've won in places that they maybe shouldn't have won, and they've lost by less in some other places. So 20 points is a big victory, but still I think that the political winds definitely favor the Democrats at this point nationally.
You'd mentioned that unlike the last few elections, this one didn't decide the control of the court. It was going to be a liberal majority anyway, but extending their majority now on the court, what does that mean just for the major cases and litigation in Wisconsin?
Well, I think it means quite a bit. I mean, you've got abortion has really become a state-level issue, right, after the overturning of Roe. So, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Act 10, which was passed by Scott Walker and the Republicans in Wisconsin after he was elected, which really hurt public sector unions in Wisconsin, will almost certainly be heard by this Supreme Court. So that outcome will be hugely significant. And then there's a whole series of other issues that with a 5-2 differential, it definitely favors the Democratic Party going forward. I mean, I think that the legislature and the governor's race are coming up. We'll see what happens there, but the court being 5-2 is a big deal because it wasn't too many years ago. Conservatives had the Supreme Court, and then the liberals or Democrats had it by one vote. Now they have it by a few. So So yeah, there's a lot of issues that this state Supreme Court, like a lot of state Supreme Courts, are going to decide.
We, of course, like Minnesota is really interesting because it has a tied house and it's closely divided in the legislature. But but Wisconsin is interesting in its own way. With you have the Republican-controlled legislature and then the governor, a Democrat.
Yeah.
But the governor, Tony Evers, is not running for re-election. So what right now, when you look at the primary process in Wisconsin, what jumps out to you about how that may develop for the Democrats and Republicans moving forward?
Well, I think that there are several candidates, and it doesn't appear to me anyway as if one or more than one are really sort of jumping out as the clear favorites, at least not maybe on the Democratic side. So I think the governor's race is a bit wide open. I mean, that would be my thought, here we are in April. But right now, the legislature, we have a new set of lines that, there's been all this back and forth, as you probably know, for many years about the districting in Wisconsin, and the case a while back went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court essentially sanctioned partisan gerrymandering. So there's a new map. The Democratic Governor Tony Evers had a big hand in establishing. It's more favorable to the Democrats, but it certainly doesn't make it one-sided for the Democratic Party at all. And so they will certainly pick up some seats. Could well win one house. I think they're optimistic that they might win both. I don't know. It's hard to say. But the governor's race, I think, is kind of a question mark at this point. So I'm sure the Democrats are going to be very happy with last night, and I think they'll probably be at least somewhat happy with the legislative results this fall. Governor's race this summer is going to tell us quite a bit.
Wisconsin's statewide races have been really close. The Senate, U.S. Senate race, 2024 was razor thin. What do you think makes Wisconsin such an interesting, sort of kind of closely contested state?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's one that a lot of analysts really kind of have studied and tried to figure out. I mean, if you go way back in Wisconsin, you've had some very progressive Democrats and some very outspoken Republicans going back many, many decades. There's also been kind of a fairly strong reform tradition in Wisconsin that goes back a long period of time. I mean, I think that there are plenty of places in Wisconsin that are very close to 50-50. Obviously, the cities themselves favor the Democratic Party, and some of the suburbs lean heavily in the Republican direction. But, other than that, there's an awful lot of places that are, kind of evenly split. And both parties have had a fairly strong history there and have always been able to attract decent candidates. And so as a result, one party really hasn't been able to, to dominate. I mean, maybe for a short time, but then, as the election of Tony Evers, I think, showed, the Walker, Republicans were dominant for a fairly short time, and then Evers gets elected and gets reelected pretty easily. So, yeah, it's just sort of a something I think characteristic about the political culture of Wisconsin. It seems pretty evenly divided, and both parties have had some very good candidates going back, really many decades.
When you look at, you obviously, because you work at UW River Falls, what do you notice about western Wisconsin in our viewing area? Just sort of, obviously I know the very western parts, although people sometimes call them like Twin Cities suburbs, have typically been, fairly red. But what have you noticed just politically kind of in this part of the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think that western Wisconsin, like very close to the border, River Falls, Hudson, places like that, and the counties that are close to the border have tended to be fairly Republican, fairly conservative. I think that they're not overwhelmingly so. They've definitely elected that part of the state, for the most part, not entirely, but has elected, Republican legislators. Usually statewide candidates win, Republican statewide candidates win in those parts of the state. Not quite as one-sided as other parts of the state. A lot of Minnesota residents, of course, are moving, have moved and are moving to places like Hudson and western Wisconsin. So there's a fair amount of overlap there between the two states. But I mean, I think that in many ways it's becoming a little more competitive. Maybe several years ago it was pretty heavily Republican, those parts of the state, and I think they're a bit more competitive these days. At least that's kind of how I read it.
The other big national news story this week related to Wisconsin and politics is the situation with the University of Wisconsin system president. Just tell us for viewers that haven't followed it, just back us up and tell us what's going on with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jay Rothman was the president of the UW system, and Jay Rothman was selected by the Board of Regents. I think it was 2022. The Board of Regents is predominantly now made up of appointees by Tony Evers, Democratic governor. They selected Jay Rothman. He's been in the office for several years now. And I'm sort of active in things that are happening in the UW system and sort of have a lot of contacts on other campuses and so forth. There's been, quite a bit that has happened in the last few years. I mean, numerous two-year schools have been closed by this UW system under this Board of Regents and this system president. We've had fairly significant budget cuts that campuses have had to enact under this Board of Regents and this system president. And, as somebody who follows the UW fairly closely, it was very surprising to me, really, because, the Board of Regents has gone along with nearly everything that Jay Rothman has brought to them, almost all of it unanimously. I follow the Board of Regents in the UW system probably as close as anyone that I know anyway. And there's been, and I've also met with regents. I've met with Jay Rothman, there's been, to my knowledge, there's been no even public pushback by the Board of Regents. Just a few weeks ago, the board voted. I was stunned that the board voted in support of allowing branch campuses to offer 90-credit 3-year bachelor's degrees. That was absolutely stunning to me. There are very few schools in the country that do this. I think it's an absolutely disastrous idea. I think it's a radical idea. And it was very casually considered, and they just went ahead and voted. And, again, it's not mandating them. It's not creating them. But it's now allowing branch campuses like mine to do that if they were to do it. That was just a few weeks ago that happened. And that that didn't come from the Board of Regents. They have not set the agenda. The agenda has been set by President Rothman, and he will come in and he will bring his initiatives in the past several years. He will put them before the board, and they have voted almost in every single major instance unanimously in support of what he has proposed. And then last Thursday, I was traveling in California. I was at a conference, and I was with my son, and my phone I start getting all these messages that, hey, Jay Rothman is going to get fired. I'm like, whoa, where did this come from? So just yesterday, I think it was 5 p.m. yesterday, the board met kind of in closed session, and they voted, and then they went back into open session. I was watching it, and they voted unanimously to fire him, basically, which they can do. I mean, he doesn't have a length of term or a tenure or anything like that. So they were, within their rights to do that. The president of the board, Amy Bogos, she put out a brief public statement that doesn't really say a whole lot other than the fact that they had talked to President Rothman. And again, it's public, so anybody can read it. They had talked to him a few times about his performance, and this was not a surprise. And I mean, that's pretty much all it says, really. It's very brief. It's less than a page. And then they, when they voted, they just did the roll call vote, and that was that. And now Jay Rothman's out of a job, and there's an interim system president, that a guy who's from the UW system that has worked there, I think, for a little while, and so it's been kind of a mystery to a lot of us. Again, I mean, if the board had pushed back against him, if they had said anything publicly at all in opposition to what he was doing for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, and just in full disclosure, I have been on record as being quite critical of what the UW system has done under President Rothman and this Board of Regents, and many times, and I study and I follow higher ed very closely, and so yeah, it surprised pretty much everybody, I think, and now the Republican Party in Wisconsin is of course pouncing, and because President Rothman was at least friendly to the Republican legislators, and many thought, well, he's too friendly to the Republican legislators, and we have a Democratic governor, and why don't we have more of a different policy agenda that reflects that on the Board of Regents in the UW system. So at this point, Republican Party has already started to pounce legislators, and they say they're going to, at least in a press report yesterday, said that they're going to ask regents, bring regents in and ask them, basically what happened. I'll be anxiously awaiting those discussions because I don't know, and I don't know if they're going to say anything more than they've already said publicly. But yeah, as we talked about a minute ago, it's become a national news story, right? I mean, it's been covered by a lot of national news outlets beyond just the higher ed press. So. Yeah, big deal, and to me anyway, a pretty big surprise.
So when it comes to the ousting of the president, do you think it's indicative of how difficult it is right now for universities to navigate the Trump administration, as you have some leaders that are trying to appease the administration while also trying to appease maybe more Democratic-minded regions? Yeah,
I mean, I think that could be part of it. I think that there's been, for a year or so now, right, a lot of discussion about what's going to happen with the federal role here and federal funding and federal, higher ed programs. And there's definitely a lot of uncertainty around that stuff. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of what the rationale would be, because I agree it's become a whole different world here in the last year, but for the board that's appointed by Tony Evers, the Democratic governor, to remove this particular system president who, and this is well documented, it has given a lot of money at least to Republican candidates over the years and probably leans in a Republican direction. I don't think that's that's news, but I'm not sure. I guess it depends who they select now. Like if they select somebody who's going to be more aggressive in opposing the administration, or if they select somebody that's and Jay Rothman is a very amiable fellow. I mean, he's not. He's a very likable guy, and he certainly doesn't. He tries to kind of get along with everybody, I think, quite well. He comes from the world of corporate law, and I think it depends. Back to your question, I think it depends who they select now, and then we can sort of look back and say maybe it's the way that they were dealing with the Trump administration might have had something to do with this, might have impacted the decision.
All right. Well, thank you for your insight, Neil. We appreciate it. You're always our eyes and ears in Wisconsin, so it's nice to talk with you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. As we continue our theme of Wisconsin politics this week, we're going to give you a look back 10 years ago, exactly a decade ago, in April of 2016, when Wisconsin held its presidential primaries for both the Democrats and Republicans.
But wouldn't you like to take the credit in Wisconsin?
10 years ago, Donald Trump blitzed Wisconsin ahead of the state's crucial April 5th presidential primary, making stops in La Crosse, Superior, and Eau Claire.
We love Wisconsin.
At that point in April 2016, though, Trump was far from a sure bet to earn the Republican nomination. The businessman and reality TV host, who had never held elected office, was locked in a competitive battle for his party's bid with Ohio Governor John Kasich and Texas Senator Ted Cruz.
They want me to act presidential. They don't want me to call him Lion Ted, okay? Lion Ted.
Cruz framed Wisconsin as a pivotal moment in the primary process.
This race has national implications. The entire country is looking to Wisconsin.
And had called his opponent an existential threat to the Republican Party.
And if we nominate Donald Trump, it hands the general election to Hillary Clinton with a big silver bow. He loses by double digits.
Although Clinton eventually became her party's nominee,
this is what makes America great.
She did not win the Wisconsin Democratic primary in 2016. Instead, Senator Bernie Sanders won the state handily as he continued his insurgent primary campaign, focused on a working-class Democratic Socialist platform.
I know there is a lot of concern in Wisconsin and around the country that Donald Trump might become president of the United States. So let me reassure you, that will not happen.
On the Republican side, Trump's populist message also drew huge crowds across the state of Wisconsin.
I believe that he'll actually do what he says and he'll make changes in our country.
Because of our trade policies, we need to get our jobs back so everybody's got a job.
But Trump didn't take Wisconsin in 2016 either. Voters rejected him in favor of Ted Cruz, who won the state by 13 points.
Tonight, Wisconsin has lit a candle guiding the way forward.
It wouldn't last. After Wisconsin, Trump dominated Cruz the rest of the month in influential East Coast states like Pennsylvania and New York, stunning the party establishment with his critiques of NATO and free trade agreements, his promises to build a wall, and proposals to ban Muslim immigration.
We will have the wall, and Mexico will pay for the wall. Because these politicians are all talk. We have to be extremely careful with radical Islamic terrorism. And we have to look at the Muslims.
In April 2016, I had the chance to interview Trump prior to his campaign stop in Rochester, New York.
Mr. Trump, you've called for a total and complete ban on Muslim immigration. We have a significant, not only Muslim population, but a population of immigrants from every country in Buffalo and in Western New York. What do you say to them?
Well, I said I called for a temporary ban. You totally misphrased the question.
Well, a temporary total and complete ban.
You didn't say that.
But that's exactly what I meant.
You didn't say that. Okay. I called for a temporary ban until we find out what we're doing, because we don't know what's going on. You look at what's flooding into our country now from Syria. We have no idea where they're coming from.
Trump wrapped up the Republican nomination throughout the spring and summer of 2016.
I humbly and gratefully accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
Heading into the general election, he was considered a heavy underdog to Clinton, including in swing states like Wisconsin, which hadn't voted for a Republican since Reagan.
Trump is in trouble in Wisconsin.
USA!
That fall, though, Trump prioritized Wisconsin on the campaign trail, stopping in Eau Claire just days before the election.
We are going to drain the swamp.
Clinton, meanwhile, skipped Wisconsin entirely and lost the state by about 20,000 votes. Her failure to visit Wisconsin and other Midwestern Rust Belt states was considered one of the reasons that Donald Trump became president in 2016. Welcome back. At the Minnesota State Capitol this week, House DFLers officially filed their ethics complaints against two Republican representatives, Representative Elliot Engin and Republican Walter Hudson, after Engin got a DWI in White Bear Lake in late March with Hudson in the car, according to police. That in turn led Republicans to file ethics complaints against a Democrat. For the first time since his DWI arrest, Representative Elliot Engin took his seat Tuesday in the House chamber. On the early morning of March 27th, White Bear Lake police pulled over Engin with Representative Walter Hudson in the car carrying a legal firearm. In response, GOP House Speaker Lisa Demuth removed both lawmakers from all committees.
As Speaker and as leader of our caucus, I did choose to remove them from those responsibilities.
But Demuth says her decision had nothing to do with the photograph taken 12 hours before Engin's arrest, showing Engin and Hudson drinking alcohol at a St. Paul restaurant when they were supposed to be in committee and prior to a House floor session.
You've had more than a week to look into this conduct. Do you believe they were intoxicated on the House floor?
What I know is the police report that came out, and that is where I am making my decision.
But you don't know if they were pictured drinking.
I am making my decision based on what the police report and the information that I received.
However, House Democrats have filed an ethics complaint against Engen and Hudson, not for Engen's DWI, but instead arguing that they violated public trust by leaving in the middle of their committees to go drinking instead.
And it is so egregious that they would simply abandon their jobs to go to a bar in the middle of the day, in the middle of a committee hearing, that yes, we thought that rose to the level of an ethics violation.
Separately, House Republicans filed their own ethics complaint against DFL Representative Alex Falconer, alleging that he violated House rules by bringing bills related to the boundary waters while working for environmental groups. Falconer and his colleagues called the complaint desperate.
He was a registered state lobbyist, and then he left being a registered state lobbyist. I think that's adequate disclosure.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of KARE 11 On the Record. Remember, you can find us streaming on KARE 11 Plus every Sunday at 8 a.m. and on demand.